How much you want to bet someone is trying to get the license to this series just to turn it into a mobile game and then implement a few microtransactions? From episode 2 on, we thankfully don't have to deal with any more spoilers, and instead got pleasant stuff like this little prologue with Hazuki. Hey, could somebody help me out here? This stuff is kind of heavy. Yeah, you know what? Let's just go back to the self-proclaimed most unfortunate girl in the entire world. Doremi was enjoying her new duds to the point that she even tried practicing a few poses in the mirror. However, Madrika wasn't impressed with her witchcraft so far and tried to bring her down a few notches, and good sweet lord. Well, I never imagined I would have to say something like this, but I really didn't need to see an angry Lima being today. Is that what the Hulk tries to keep contained in his purple undies? Anyway, to continue her witch training, Doremi agreed to go to the Mahodo whenever she had time in exchange for more magic spheres. The next day, we learned a little bit more about this show's magical systems, including how witches were supposed to take exams in order to go through a sort of leveling system that went with reverse numbering, starting from 9 and going to 1. So basically, they were using a similar ranking system as the one from Irma-kun. Ooh, somebody make a crossover of that, like, right now. Doremi was currently unleveled, but apparently would receive a fairy like Lala as soon as she achieved level 9. However, that would be a story for another day, as Doremi had classes. And of course, she met with the focus character of this episode. Hazuki was still a little down, but her friend was there to cheer her up by providing her with some not at all forced exposition. Like, seriously, how often do you list the fact that your friend is rich and what her parents' occupations are? And as a result of Doremi's insensitivity, Hazuki went on ahead and didn't talk with her for the rest of the day. Unable to figure out what she had done wrong, Doremi consulted with another teacher, Yuki. And unlike some of this actress's other roles in Precure, she was gonna stick around in this show to provide some good sage advice like this. After school, the two managed to make up, but Doremi still wanted to try and consult her through her problems. And of course, Hazuki had to go and say the M-word and how it was the only thing that could solve her problems by letting them switch places. So with that, Doremi suited up, and while she did remember the frog rule thing, she tried to work around it by saying that her witch persona was a completely different person. Girl, just because Usagi Tsukino can get away with it, don't think you can too. Anyway, the frog rule will be addressed again later in a bit of a confusing manner, but for now at least, Hazuki was willing to play along. Using Doremi's magic, the friends turned themselves into each other, so yeah, for this episode, they were doing the basic Freaky Friday scenario. With that, the two went home to the other girl's residence. At the Harakaze household, Remy tried to be a good big sister to Pop, which thanks to the show having done a really good job establishing the relationship between these sisters, within less than just 2 episodes no less, we could tell this wasn't exactly the Doremi this little sister was used to. Yeah, that is the absolute most perfect cringe face I've ever seen in my entire life. And apparently, the fact that she could make a perfect paper crane was something especially out of the ordinary for them. Oh yeah? Well, can you make yours fly? Because I can. Look! But yeah, obviously, most of the humor of this episode came from the aforementioned Freaky Friday setup, with the reactions of those familiar with these characters providing the most laughs. Thus, even though Hazuki wasn't doing anything particularly abnormal, it was something very different for Doremi, as she usually fit in with this pretty bizarre family. Yeah, Hazuki, don't be too surprised if a guy like this comes to visit you tonight. Though really, the fact that she actually recognized the domestic violence complete with actual punching definitely makes her the sanest character in this show, as well as the most sympathetic. Yeah, I get that this is both meant to be played up for laughs as well as show the closest of the Harakazes, which we will get to in just a minute. But you know, in real life, this stuff doesn't always end so well, just saying. Conversely, at the Fujiwara residence, Doremi was definitely the oddball, having all the subtlety of a witch dressed in bright pink. That said, unlike her real family, who definitely had their quirks, the Fujiwaras were notably a little more distant, with even her mother referring to her own daughter when honorific, rather than with more familiar connotations. This was on top of her kind of treating her daughter like a plaything, dressing her up, and making her take all sorts of extracurricular activities. Now thankfully, they weren't just playing up the Fujiwaras as a stereotypically wealthy, awful parent trope, as regardless, they were still providing for their daughter, and were probably more attentive than the Harakazes, just lacking the familiarity, if that makes any sense. Still, in both cases, they did try to protect the well-being of their daughters, a little too much, and both ended up being sent to bed early, and both ended up missing out on some really tasty-looking steak dinners. Though, to be fair, the Fujiwaras might have shown just a little more concern, considering they didn't even mind the noticeable animation errors. Eventually, the spell on both of them wore off, forcing Doremi to rush home and switch back with Hazuki. Why do I get the feeling someone specifically requested the curvy fairy lean back into a position like that? This led to the pretty obvious lesson of the episode, appreciate your families and all that, but to be fair, it was delivered in a very wholesome way, with both girls being able to point out the good points of each other's families. Pretty nice stuff. With that, Doremi took Hazuki home, while also learning that she hadn't even touched her steak dinner, and thus she could enjoy it the next day. Really? Cause to me, leftover steak never really tastes all that good, at least compared to a fresh one. Well, Mr. Harakaze seemed to agree with me and just let Pop eat it. And thus, the episode ended once again with Doremi's favorite catchphrase. I almost feel like I should just have a wah-wah on standby for all of these reviews. Anyway, this was a nice episode. I mean, again, the Freaky Friday scenario has been done a million times, but I think they did enough new stuff here that they managed to milk out at least a few laughs out of this played out setup, and at the same time, they had some nice touchy moments, and most importantly, they give us a good introduction to the lonely little rich girl. As I mentioned when talking about the Harakaze sisters, this show really has a knack for characterization. Mostly because it often makes this cast pretty wild and bombastic, so it's actually hard to miss many of their traits and relationships with one another. Though that's obviously not the case for the soft-spoken Hazuki, and yet this episode still gave us a good idea of what she's like. This was done by bringing her relatively more subdued issues to the forefront and portraying them in a gripping and sympathetic light. From there, it was just a matter of finding her a good dance partner to act as a good foil to compare lifestyles with. Again, Doremi is just a fun character in this show, partially because she is a good friend, trying to help quell Hazuki's issues, but also clearly having a few ulterior motives. It's a good combination of an amiable, yet also entertainingly trashy protagonist, kind of like a certain princess who I also really like. The Freaky Friday stuff, while again played out and not quite as funny as some of the stuff I've seen in Precure, did generate at least a few decent laughs out of me. I think I especially liked the Harakaze family looking at their first daughter as though she were possessed. And of course, the resolution of the grass always being greener on the other side message was touching and a wholesome way to close things out. Overall, this was nothing spectacular, but still not a bad way to introduce the second main heroine of the show, with the third coming next week. Though, before we get to next week, do check out part 1 of my Mahotsukai Precure manga Volume 2 review coming out this Friday. I'll say this right now, I think both of these franchises are competing for the most insane thing I consume on a weekly basis. And while I can't say who's gonna win that contest, I get the feeling that none of us are gonna win because by the end we're all going to lose our minds. Still, look forward to it, and until then though, farewell for now my friends, and yeah, if you'll excuse me, I think I'm in the mood for some steak tonight. Believe me, I never leave leftovers.